Welcome back, everyone. This is DA Sports. I'm your host, DASASIN. Thank you. This is episode number 19. Today, we got to get into a couple of things. Obviously, we got to go over my picks from week 10, see how they did. Go into each individual section. So that's the pick 3, my lock of the week, and my underdog pick of the week, and see how they did. Then also we have to finish this episode with my top 5 and worst 5 NFL rankings after week number 10. Now, if you remember from the same episode where I did after week number 5, every 5 weeks, instead of the top 5 and worst 5, I'm actually going to give you my all 32 rankings. That's right. I'm going to rank every single team from top to bottom in the NFL in this episode. So stay tuned for that. Let's get into it. Okay, so first we got to recap my week 10 picks. To start, of course, we got to get into my pick 3. Now, this week's pick 3, I did go 2-1. So not perfect, but still more positive than negative. On the season, that brings me to a record of 18-9. So definitely still much more positive than negative. And like I said before, if you were betting all of these games, you would be definitely way up. So keep them coming. Hopefully we can get a 3-0 next week. Now, to break these games down individually, the first pick in my pick 3 was the Atlanta Falcons. I had the Atlanta Falcons beating the New Orleans Saints. Unfortunately, this was the game that I was wrong about, which was a complete shock to me. Obviously, the Saints had lost 7 straight going into this game. They had just fired their head coach. And there's this common misnomer about teams getting a boost whenever there's like a huge change, whether like a coach gets fired or a player gets cut or something mid-season drastic happens. And in this case, it actually seemed to be true because the Saints looked better than they've looked since the beginning of the season. And the Falcons looked pretty mediocre. So even though the Falcons were favored, they did end up losing. The final score was 20-17. So this is definitely a game I was wrong about. But part of the reason why I did have it in my pick 3 is because with all of these pick 3 games, I feel like it could go either way. Anytime there's a division rival, which the Falcons and Saints are definitely division rivals, anything can happen. These teams are very familiar with each other. They play each other close in most games, regardless of if one team is significantly better than the other. And this was no exception. Even the game they played earlier in the season that the Falcons won, the game was close. So this one fell in line with that too. The only difference is actually the Saints seem to be dominating this game from start to finish. Atlanta did close late and made it close, which is why they only lost by 3, but they still lost. So this was the game that I got wrong, and you'll see this reflected heavily in my final rankings at the end of this episode. Now, for the next game in my pick 3, I had the Los Angeles Chargers beating the Tennessee Titans. Now, the Chargers did win this game, so I was correct. Final score was 27-17. As I predicted in the previous episode, I said that this game might be one of those ones where it starts off kind of close and then it ends up getting stretched out later in the game, and that's exactly what happened. The Chargers have definitely impressed me. I didn't expect them to have this positive of a record this deep into the season. Now, part of that is that they haven't had the most rigorous schedule so far, but as I've said previously, you can only play who's on your schedule, and that's what they've done. They've definitely turned things around with Jim Harbaugh being the coach this year, and you can definitely see them progressing. Even though Justin Herbert hasn't put up gaudy numbers, he seems to be playing more within the offense. Harbaugh definitely put an emphasis on running the ball and establishing defensive pressure. It's pretty much his signature no matter what team he's coached, whether it was in the NFL or in college. And he translated that to the Chargers, and they played in that same style. So even though Herbert's numbers haven't been spectacular, they've been good enough for them to get wins, which I think is what Harbaugh's intention was when he put together this whole game plan. So the Chargers have been running the ball effectively. They have been very aggressive on defense, and Herbert is basically maintaining the ship, and they were able to pull off another impressive win this week over the Titans. And yes, they did cover the spread. Now, the last game in my pick 3 was the Philadelphia Eagles to beat the Dallas Cowboys. Now, again, all the games that I put in my pick 3 are games that I feel like could potentially go either way. The only reason I thought this game could go either way is because for the same reason in the first game, the Falcons and the Saints, this is a division rival. The Eagles and the Cowboys are one of the oldest rivalries in the NFL. And again, no matter how good or bad the teams are, they usually play each other close. This game was an exception. The Eagles won 34-6, so I was right in my prediction. Also right that they would cover the spread and that they would cover the spread easily. But this one was even worse than I could have expected. I did announce before the game that Dak Prescott was going to be out because he's injured. They did, after the game, announce that he is going to have season-ending surgery. I believe he just had surgery today. So hopefully he recovers well. But based on Dallas's performance in this game, their season is over. And you'll definitely see this reflected in my final rankings at the end of this episode. But this was basically a slaughter from beginning to end. The Eagles pretty much could do whatever they wanted to. The Cowboys couldn't do anything at all. Cooper Rush, who led the team to 5 wins the last time that Dak was out for an extended period of time, looked horrible. And even at the end of the game, when they put in Trey Lance, he didn't look much better. The entire team had less than 150 total yards in the game. That's ridiculous. Cooper Rush, I believe, threw for 45 yards in the game. And it's not like they were playing a top-tier pass defense. The Eagles' actual weak spot on their team has been their pass defense. Yet they held the Cowboys' starting quarterback in this game to 45 yards passing. That's just atrocious. So definitely not a good outlook for the Cowboys going forward, but definitely a good outlook for the Eagles going forward, especially because the Washington Commanders did end up losing their game. So now the Eagles are currently in first place in the division with a huge game coming up next week where the Eagles and Commanders play against each other. So now beyond my pick 3, we got to get into my lock of the week. Now, my lock of the week this week was the Minnesota Vikings beating the Jacksonville Jaguars. I was right with this one, so 1-0 this week, bringing me to 6-3 on the year in my lock of the week. Definitely been on a roll with the lock of the week. Remember, I started off the first 4 weeks at 1-3. So basically the last 5 weeks, I've gotten every single lock of the week correct. This one was closer than I expected. On paper, part of the reason why I said this was my lock of the week is because I felt like Jacksonville wouldn't be able to move the ball effectively against Minnesota's defense. And I was right. Jacksonville only scored 7 points in this game. The part that I was surprised with is I was expecting Minnesota's offense to be much more effective. Minnesota's offense only finished with 12 points, and actually they were losing for most of the game and then were able to score late and take the lead. So that was the surprising part. But nonetheless, they did get the win, which is what I predicted. So as long as it ends correct, that's what's important. So Minnesota did get the win, and Jacksonville continued to lose. But they do look better than they had looked earlier in the season. We'll see how this plays out as the season continues. Now, after my lock of the week, we got to get into my underdog pick of the week. For anyone new to the channel, my underdog pick of the week is a team that's favored to lose by more than 3 points that I feel like has the best chance to win. Now, this week, as has been the trend, I was wrong. I did pick the Tampa Bay Bucks to upset the San Francisco 49ers, and the game was really close. They did have a chance at the end, ended up losing with the end of the game field goal by San Francisco. So they ended up losing 23-20. Now, they did cover the spread, but they didn't win the game, so that makes it wrong for my underdog pick of the week. But it definitely lined up to where it looked like they had an opportunity to win. A few mistakes in that fourth quarter that led to San Francisco having the opportunity to get back the lead and end the game on top. Now, unlike some of the other weeks in my underdog pick of the week, we did have a couple of underdog pick of the week candidates that I could have chosen that actually would have won. One of which being the New Orleans Saints. They were favored to lose by more than 3 points, and they ended up winning the game. Another team was the New England Patriots, which ironically was one of the games I was considering picking as my underdog pick of the week, but I had more confidence in the Bucs based on how they looked in the previous week game against the Chiefs. Nonetheless, I was wrong, but there were 2 other options that would have been right had I selected them. All right, so that's it for my picks from week number 10. Let's get right into my top 5 and worst 5 NFL rankings after week number 10. So for those who didn't see the rankings after week 5, again, I am going to go through all 32 teams. Now for the top 5 and worst 5, I'm going to give a little more detail of why I put them there. But everybody between 6 and 27, I'm just going to go through telling you who I have in each different position. So let's get started. At number 1, of course, I got to go with the Kansas City Chiefs. Yes, they are still the last undefeated team in the league. Yes, they were losing most of the game at home. Yes, most people thought they were going to lose with a game-winning field goal, but they got a block. It was a spectacular block kick. If you actually check out Dan Orlovsky, he actually went over it on Monday, how the Chiefs actually progressively wore down the tackle who they blew over in that last play in order to get the block. And actually, they clearly had scouted that he was the weak point in the line. There's actually video of him falling down in several other games earlier in the season. So the special teams coordinator definitely did his homework, and they time after time after time slowly slid more and more of their strongest defensive linemen and linebackers to rush over that particular player so that they could be in position to get a block, and they did it in the most timely fashion possible. Leo Chanel had enough strength to not only knock him over, but then step through and dive and get the block. And George Karlaftis was right behind him to where even if Chanel had missed the block, Karlaftis likely would have gotten the block himself. So it was perfectly executed play by the field goal block team, and it saved the Chiefs from seeing their first loss. Definitely an exciting game. They won 16-14. Now they roll into a huge game this upcoming week against the Bills. Now at number 2, obviously got to go with the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions have, for the most part, shown to be the most complete team in the league. Only reason I don't have them at 1 is because the Chiefs haven't lost yet. And my rule of thumb is until you lose, you cannot be passed in rankings. The same way I feel in the opposite spectrum that until you get a win, you can't rise above somebody in the rankings either. So for now, Detroit remains at number 2. They also had a very, very close game that came down to the end. The Houston Texans were beating them most of the game. Jared Goff had his worst performance of the season, throwing 5 interceptions. The defense stepped it up in the second half, and they started getting their own turnovers. And even though Houston scored 23 points in the first half, or 20 points in the first half, they didn't score any more points for the rest of the game. So Detroit definitely stepped it up. Like I said, I do believe they have the most well-rounded team in terms of offense, defense, and special teams. And they look to be the most dominant team in the NFC by far, so they remain at the number 2 spot. At number 3, we're still going to stay with the Minnesota Vikings. Their win, like I mentioned, against Jacksonville wasn't as impressive as I expected it to be, but nonetheless, they still got the job done. They still have shown that their defense is going to be a problem for just about anyone. And with that defense, and of course with Justin Jefferson on the other side, they're capable of playing with anyone or beating anyone for that matter, which is why I have them at number 3. At number 4, with finding themselves back in the top 5 after weeks and weeks of missing out, is the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the Ravens had a huge division win against the Cincinnati Bengals, making the second time this year that they got the win. And in both games, they came down to the end of the game, and Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry were able to find a way to win. Another high-scoring game, which to me is a little troubling for Baltimore. Baltimore is always known for having a tough defense, and this year it is definitely not the case, especially their pass defense. They've had several games where they've given up a lot of pass yards, a lot of points, and they've fallen apart late in games. Thankfully, they were able to pull out the win this week against Cincinnati, but part of the reason why they're not higher on this list is because they haven't been able to close out games as much as people would like them to. And at number 5, rounding out the top 5 with their first time in the top 5 this season, is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, the Pittsburgh Steelers had one of their toughest competitions this week. They were able to beat the Washington Commanders, who I believe were in 5th in last week's top 5. Definitely a great game that came down to the end. The Steelers were able to get a last-second field goal. No, actually, it was a last-second touchdown to Mike Williams, who they just acquired this week from the New York Jets right before the trade deadline. Then they were able to get the ball and run the clock out and ending the game by, I believe it was 4th and 1, getting Washington's rookie defensive lineman to jump, and they were able to run the rest of the clock out and get the win. They won by 1 point. So being able to beat other top-tier teams is definitely a sign of being a good team. Pittsburgh is always known for having a great defense, but with Russell Wilson back in the mix, they haven't lost a game, and they look a lot better on offense, which makes them a very scary team for other teams to play. And for me, they deserve to be in that number 5 spot. All right, so coming in at number 6, I'm going with the Philadelphia Eagles. At number 7, I have the Green Bay Packers. At number 8, I have the Washington Commanders. At number 9, I have the Buffalo Bills. At number 10, I have the Arizona Cardinals. At number 11, I have the San Francisco 49ers. At 12, I have the Los Angeles Chargers. At 13, I have the Houston Texans. At 14, I have the Denver Broncos. At 15, I have the Miami Dolphins. At 16, I have the Los Angeles Rams. At 17, I have the Seattle Seahawks. At 18, I have the Atlanta Falcons. At 19, I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At 20, I have the Cincinnati Bengals. At 21, I have the New York Jets. At 22, I have the Cleveland Browns. At 23, I have the Indianapolis Colts. At 24, I have the Tennessee Titans. At 25, I have the New England Patriots. At 26, I have the New Orleans Saints. At 27, I have the Chicago Bears. Now for the worst 5. At 28, I have the Carolina Panthers. Now the Panthers have been at the bottom of the top 5 for a majority of the season, but they just recently went back to Bryce Young. Bryce Young has looked a lot better since he was benched earlier in the season. I think he definitely learned a little bit watching Andy Dalton. He looks to be more poised in the pocket. The team has a little more spark to him. Even though nobody really expects Carolina to make a push for playoffs, they definitely don't deserve to be at the bottom of the bottom anymore. They're now at the top of the bottom, so congratulations. At 29, we got to go with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, the Jaguars have been up and down most of the season. They have, though, looked more impressive in the last few weeks ever since they came back from England. They played 2 games in England. They won 1 and they lost 1. But since they've been back, even though they have been losing, all of the games they've played have been against good teams, and all of the games have been within 1 score, which is a lot different than what was happening earlier in the season. So again, they don't deserve to be at the very bottom of the list, but they still deserve to be in this bottom 5, which is why they are at 29. At number 30, we got to go with the New York Giants. Now, the Giants have pretty much looked pathetic. They show sparks here and there. Their defense definitely has tons of valuable players on there. They definitely get after the ball, but their offense is pretty much hit and miss. Tracy, their running back, has looked great. He is a rookie that once was a receiver and is now a running back. He looks great in the role, but he still has his receiver skills, which is why he's able to catch a lot of balls out of the backfield. But they're not able to put it together enough to get wins. I know it has to hurt Giants fans even more to watch the production that Saquon Barkley is doing with the Philadelphia Eagles. And he should have still been a Giant, but they decided to keep Daniel Jones, which I'm pretty sure they have to regret now because there's no way I see Daniel Jones being the starting quarterback next year unless they draft a rookie and want him to sit behind Daniel Jones for a year. But other than that, I feel like Daniel Jones is definitely going to be in another jersey next season. So right now, the Giants are at 30. At 31, got to go with the Las Vegas Raiders. Ever since they traded away Davante Adams, they haven't looked any better, which, of course, should be expected. He was clearly their best offensive weapon. They at one point said they were going to build around him. For whatever reason, it didn't work out. He got traded to the Jets. And even though they were off this week, if you look at their most recent games, they haven't shown any sign that anything was getting better. I don't really expect them to do anything going forward. And off of first thought, I probably would have put them last, but I can't put them last. Because at 32, which is going to surprise some people, I got to go with the Dallas Cowboys. That's right. The Dallas Cowboys right now are the worst team in the league. Now, yes, this is surprising. This is a team that before the season, I actually picked to win their division. There's no chance of that happening. Obviously, as announced earlier, Dak Prescott is going to be out for the season. Previously, Cooper Rush, when he filled in, looked serviceable, but not anymore. He looks terrible. And Trey Lance looks terrible too. This offense had already looked bad throughout the season. I really feel bad for CeeDee Lamb because he's their one bright spot. But every single team that plays the Cowboys knows he's their only weapon. So they can double team him. They can triple team him. They can dare the Cowboys to try to run the ball. The Cowboys have one of the worst offensive rushing attacks in the league. And with Cooper Rush looking basically like trash against a trash passing defense, there's no way I expect the Cowboys to win any more games for the rest of the season. Now, of course, it's possible. They do have some other games in their season against bottom 5 teams like the Giants. But I don't see it happening. I think that the Cowboys will probably go the rest of the season without getting another single win. And I guess in their case, that's a good thing because then they can get a top-tier pick and maybe change things around. They definitely got to get rid of their head coach. Other than that, their other mainstays are pretty much stuck in place because they just signed new contracts. They definitely need running back help. Probably should have signed Derrick Henry in the offseason, but they didn't. So, yes, the Dallas Cowboys this season are officially trash, and they deserve to be in the 32 spot in this week's top 5 and worst 5 rankings. So that's it for this week's episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share wherever possible. And I look forward to talking to you in the next episode. Peace.